Heisman finalists are fascinating. As expected, Joe Burrow among them. The Bayou Bengal looking to join Billy Cannon as the only Heisman winners in LSU history. At the other end of the spectrum, it's Ohio State and Justin Fields looking to become the 8th winner in Buckeyes history, which would move them past Oklahoma and Notre Dame for most all time. Now, so is Chase Young, also from Ohio State, became the 4th D lineman ever to be invited to New York for the Heisman ceremony. He's been dynamic this year. And Jalen Hurts continued a recent trend as Oklahoma has now had a quarterback as a Heisman finalist in 4 straight years. That's the first time that's happened for any school. Now, Burrow's season, as we do expect him to win it, has been one for the ages. He's poised to break Colt McCoy's single-season completion percentage record, and he's already made SEC history with the most passing touchdowns and yards in a single season.
It seems for the 2nd straight year, we may get a guy that no one had ever even heard of or thought about before the season began, who winds up the #1 pick in the draft. And that brings in this man. There he is. Mel Kiper Jr. is ready to go this morning. So now Joe Burrow has the SEC championship. He has 1 or maybe 2 games left to go. Where do you see him at this stage of the evaluation as we start looking ahead all the way to April?
Greeny is a clear-cut #1 pick overall, and that's because of the great year he had on the heels of a so-so fourth-year junior season. That's why he was kind of off the radar as far as the first round is concerned, maybe even the second round with a lot of people going into the year. And it's the 3rd straight year we have had a guy come out of relatively nowhere in terms of the first-round discussion in Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray, and now Joe Burrow. Think about last year, Greeny. 57% or less in 8 games. He was at 45% in 2 games completion percentage. Okay, this year, he's been over 71% in every game. He's been at 78% or more, 79% or more in 6 games. Okay, last year he had 0 games of that. So it is a huge difference from 57% and change to 78%, from 16 touchdown passes to 48. That's the reason, Greeny, he went from a guy people were thinking 3rd, 4th round to the #1 pick overall for a 5th-year senior. When did you ever think you'd see a 5th-year senior quarterback in this day and age? You didn't think you'd see it, but we have it now in Joe Burrow as maybe the #1 pick, or I should say as the #1 pick overall.
Fair, and he is 3 years older than Trevor Lawrence is right now. We all know that Lawrence, the star quarterback at Clemson, is not eligible to come out this year. So I'm asking you a hypothetical, and I know you hate that, so I grant that ahead of time. But if those 2 guys were both coming out, Burrow and Lawrence, what is your best guess as to which one of them would go first?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, you got Trevor Lawrence was the #1 guy. He's like Andrew Luck. He was always considered #1. It was he and Justin Fields coming out of high school. Joe Burrow had to say, hey, I got to beg people to get me. Ohio University, with his father offered him, and then Ohio State came in. Nobody really was interested. Remember Josh Allen? Nobody wanted Josh. He ended up at Wyoming. Now he's a heck of a quarterback. So Joe Burrow is going to be the #1 guy. Josh was a top 10 pick. And he's having a real great start to his career and proving all those doubters and skeptics wrong. I think with Joe Burrow, I think where he is right now is based on the performance from start to finish and that consistency. Trevor Lawrence hasn't had that yet. And the first 7 games this year, Greeny, Trevor Lawrence was 14 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Last 6 games, 20 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, okay? And his completion percentage this year is better than it was last year. So I think when you look at Trevor Lawrence, next year, he's going to be in line to be the #1 pick overall. If you said they were both available this year, you go by the guy. I would go with that guy who's been under the microscope and has played the much tougher schedule. I would go with Joe Burrow. But we'll see. We got Ohio State coming up with Clemson. Then we probably have LSU. It'll be the first time we've seen Trevor Lawrence go up against big-time teams. We've seen Joe Burrow do it and been phenomenal. We haven't seen Trevor Lawrence do it yet this year. Saw it last year. We haven't seen it this year. That's why right now, if you had said to me, answer the question, I would go with Joe Burrow.
I could do this all day long. So let me ask you one more. I want to ask you about Chase Young, because Laura just mentioned he's invited to New York, and most people talk about him as the best player in college football. We all understand the value of the quarterback. But we've seen guys go #1 as pass rushers, Jadeveon Clowney, Myles Garrett. Is Chase Young that kind of good?
Yeah, and his numbers compared to Clowney and also Myles Garrett are pretty equal. You think about the sack numbers, he's a half behind Garrett. He's right where he's 6 ahead, 5.5 ahead of Clowney. Now tackles for loss, Clowney and Myles Garrett has a slight edge, maybe 6 over the final 3 years, all 3-year guys. But when you look at Chase Young, he's going to be the 2nd pick. I don't say probably, he will be the 2nd pick overall, and he will be expected to be everything Myles Garrett and Nick Bosa and Von Miller and Khalil Mack and Jadeveon Clowney have become, which is great pass rushers and dynamic presence on those defensive fronts.
All right, let someone get that man a piece of pumpkin pie. Great to see you, Mel. We'll be talking a lot between now and the draft, obviously. And then we'll get to this, okay? We've seen these are some of the best prospects this year amongst teams that are not in the college football playoff. And we've seen numerous super high-end prospects sit out the final games of their collegiate careers. The names that jump to mind immediately: Christian McCaffrey got drafted high. Leonard Fournette got drafted even higher. That trend continued last year. Devin Bush, N'Keal Harry, Ed Oliver. All these guys wound up getting drafted high, and all the names on this screen are guys that we're going to wind up seeing getting drafted. So as we talk about sort of a new era in college football now, with the transfer portal that came up earlier this morning, this is another new piece of this. Yeah. So I'm curious, if you, Desmond Howard, who were the 4th pick in the draft once upon a time,
right,
if you were playing in a bowl game that was not for a championship, do you think you would have played?
Today, no. I'm going to tell you why. Because my circumstances with my dad, it was just me and my dad after my parents' divorce. It was just the two of us. And I had to work with him one summer. He worked really, really tough job. His tool and die in the factory. And I did that summer. I realized that how much my dad put into work and just to provide for me. And I wanted to remove him from those circumstances. So I would have not played in the bowl game. If I've gone this far, and I know I'm projected to be a top 10 pick, I'm not going to take that risk at this point because now the books have been opened. I know how much everyone's making off of our labor. We're the workhorses. And now I have an opportunity to take my father out of that situation and set us up financially for some sort of security for the rest of our lives. I would not have taken that risk because of my situation. And Dylan McCaffrey did the same thing, too.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think when
this is probably the bowl game I would not have played in. This is the Gator Bowl. I actually had a great game. I had 2 touchdowns against Ole Miss.
Get him!
But those highlights would not exist today because I would not have played in the Gator Bowl.
And I see what you're saying. I mean, look, everybody's family situation is so important in trying to figure out what you would do here. But the one thing I would point to is last year I was on the sideline for the Citrus Bowl, which featured Penn State and Kentucky. And Kentucky had some big-time guys, one of them being Josh Allen, who ends up being the 7th overall pick. And it was really important for him and Benny Snell to play in that game. And they said no matter what, they want to play in the game. It was a championship atmosphere there. That game meant a lot for them. They had a legacy at Kentucky that they wanted to solidify with a 10-win season. So I do think it's situational, but there are some of these bowl games that really matter to these players.
Yeah, I was part of one. I mean, when I went to school, I'm from Connecticut, and I went to UConn when they just started to get into, back then, 1A football. And so when my senior year, we had the chance to go and play in a bowl game. It was our school's first bowl game ever. You couldn't have given me any amount of money not to play in this bowl game.
Dan. Rolling out to the right.
Dual athlete.
A dime.
I was kind of the first quarterback.
Ball placement right there, so the defender couldn't get it. Real low. Exit. Man,
I'm dead.
I had to pay that guy $20 to hold that up. But I would have played in the bowl game because, to Laura's point, I went to UConn to put UConn football on the map and to go take them to the first bowl game. But my circumstances were completely different than yours, Des. I think your story is incredible. And I think Dez's story, so people understand it, is more of what college football is than mine. Yeah. More people need to understand, a lot of these kids that have the opportunity to play in the bowl game, their choice may not be yes or no. It may only be no because not only have I worked 8, 9, 10 years to get to this moment, my family has sacrificed a ton.
Absolutely.
And it's time to go take the next step and do what Desmond was talking about with his family.
And my circumstances weren't great in college, but I would have gone to the bowl game if they had free beer. But I completely agree. I mean, unless it's a special circumstance, and Laura, the Kentucky situation last year was interesting. No big-time first-round player, if he's not playing in a national championship or a semifinal, maybe the Rose Bowl is going to go.
Look,
I mean, these games just don't have the value anymore they used to.
It's worth pointing out 2 things. One, the NFL doesn't care. Right? So that's a big piece of this. Not one player is dropping because they didn't play in these games.
Right.
And the other piece of it that I think is worth pointing out is this applies to a very small number of players.
True.
Most of them need that game, right?
Absolutely.
They want another game of tape against good competition.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah, so they need it.
And I also think it's Jalen Smith. You know, and obviously he overcome it. Nick Bosa, there's some data of he didn't play. One guy benefit. You know, there's some proof of injury being a part of it as well.
You put UConn on the map. Was that in disappearing ink? Because I don't see.
Orlowski doesn't deserve this.
Fired.
Just to make you feel better. Just to make you feel better. Show a picture of Carson Wentz. He loves Carson Wentz. Go ahead, Carson Wentz. He played like Superman. But we'll show you why being Clark Kent